Hi everyone, my name is Nick, and today I'm going to discuss what I would consider to be my choices for top 5 philodendron. I thought it'd be kind of fun to do a little series here on my channel where I just go through all the different groups of houseplants and kind of narrow down what are my current top 5 favorites. And I'm going to be a little bit more deliberate with it than I normally am. I'm going to stick to a strict top 5 format, and I am going to have this in a particular order. Normally I'm like, no particular order, I love them all, but no more. This is in absolutely a particular order, so super straightforward, right? Wrong! No, I'm just kidding, it's very straightforward. So today I'm going to start off by talking about my Philodendron gloriosum. This is my pick for number 5 favorite philodendron, and this fortunately is the one I'm talking about first because it's definitely going to be taking up the most room today. I can probably barely get it into the frame. So this is a creeping philodendron. Many of the philodendrons that we grow in our home are more climbing or trailing philodendrons, so I do really appreciate that about this houseplant. But this is one that's really gained a lot of popularity over the last couple of years. Of course, philodendrons have kind of gained a lot of popularity as a whole, but this is definitely one of those ones in specific that's really caught the spotlight. And I totally understand why. These leaves are pretty incredible. I got a bunch of really nice ones that are hiding probably below the camera frame right now. But the matte green leaves combined with like the literal illuminated white veins is just something really to behold. And I understand why so many people are obsessed with it. The price has climbed a little too high in the recent years, which is kind of silly because this is just like was before a landscape philodendron similar to like philodendron burl marks in like the tropics. So yeah, not the most exciting thing that this thing has shot up in price because it really wasn't worth that much beforehand, but maybe it'll follow the trends of all of the other crazy popular houseplants that are now just being mass produced. Fingers crossed. This is just a phenomenal philodendron as like a showpiece because it's not necessarily going to be one that is climbing up a moss pole or trailing down. Like I said, this is going to stay put inside the pot for the most part. I think it can creep out like a little bit, but it's not really going to be trailing like many of the other philodendron that we're used to. So definitely much more of a focal piece philodendron. Out of all of the creeping philodendrons that I have tried out, this is definitely the one I've had the most success with, which is very fortunate because I would say, in my opinion, this is probably one of the most easiest. One tip that I did learn through social media, I forget where it originated, but was just to throw a little bit of sphagnum moss into your typical aroid mix when potting up your Philodendron gloriosum, as they just appreciate being a little bit more on the moist side, but at the same time, you don't want to use a soil that's too loamy because these also don't like to sit in very rich soils. So still using a little bit more of an airy or aerated aroid mix, but adding in a little bit of that sphagnum moss just helps keep the moisture a little bit higher, but also just keep the aeration high as well. So a really cool philodendron that's also super easy to propagate. I've done a whole plant of the week episode on this houseplant, getting a little bit more in depth into that, but this plant's main stem just creeps along the soil as it grows, and as it does that, it's rooting constantly down into the soil. So if you go ahead and propagate it, you're often going to find that the houseplant has already rooted its way down into the planter, and as long as you're able to carefully separate it, you're pretty much already going to have a rooted houseplant ready to go. And I often do find myself propagating this because as it does grow along the soil and creeps to the edge of the planter, since I have mine a little bit lower, it's not just going to creep over the edge and down around the planter, which I don't think it's going to do much anyway, but it kind of just starts to have some problems with the new growth coming in. So to be safe, I'm just constantly cutting this plant back, and it's just the houseplant that keeps on giving. Of course, you could propagate it in water as well, but like I said, I've never come across that situation because I've always just had my plant propagate itself, basically. But if you can't tell from my strained talking, this plant is pretty heavy, so I think it's time to move on to my number 4 pick today, which is going to be this one right here. That might be poking a little bit onto camera. So this is my Philodendron bernardropazii, and I really love the leaf shape of this philodendron. It's got quite an interesting like triangular shape with the way that the leaves are just kind of like winged at the top, and it's just like more of that one of those like plain green houseplants. It does have a nice little like vein to it, but it's nothing that's like too pronounced, at least at its level of maturity right now. And it is, like I said, a more plain green one. I feel like you guys can't get the full experience of this houseplant because, you know, you can't really see it in all of its glory in the little frame that you get of it, but it's really quite an interesting climbing houseplant. It's got a little bit of red tinging to it. I wonder if that becomes more noticeable as this plant matures. still getting to know this houseplant, but it's just a really fun one that I feel pretty confident that I'm going to be attaching it to my trellis in the near future, and probably within the year time it could be reaching the ceiling, which is just so lovely. It's really become quite a vigorous grower. You can see how thick the stem is starting to get, getting a little bit more thicker as it starts to gain maturity, so I do have to be sure to keep it tight to the support as you do with many of your philodendrons. I've definitely had a couple grow higher and higher and get thicker and thicker, and then they fall over and snap, which is not really a big deal because then you can just go ahead and propagate it, but it ruins the main integrity of the plant. This philodendron is an excellent gateway, if you will, into some of the more out there philodendrons if you're just getting your feet wet with philodendrons, as this is by no means a common philodendron. It's definitely one that's a little bit more out there, but it doesn't carry that price tag that some of those really wild philodendrons that people are obsessed with lately has. So I feel pretty confident you could find a pretty decent starter plant of this for between like $50 and $100, which I feel like is acceptable. I don't like to spend more than $100 on any houseplant. Obviously, I don't have an agenda on trying to sell you any philodendrons or anything, so spend what you want to be real, but I don't think any of the houseplants I'm talking today, I would personally never consider spending over $100 for them, especially if it's on like a 4 to 6 inch pot. So that's just my own opinion. You can feel however you want. This is one that I spent, I'd say, I think like $70 on for like a pretty full 10-inch pot of this plant to get started, but I have actually propagated this piece off because a 10-inch pot was a little unmanageable, although I'm still dealing with what I want to do with the 10-inch pot, but this 6-inch pot of it is much more manageable. Definitely fits my home's aesthetic much more, and I'm really excited to see how it grows. Like I said, I feel like it's going to grow up to my ceiling in no time at all, and I'm interested to see if these leaves continue to grow in length because they're definitely becoming a little bit more developed as they grow. You can see this leaf, which barely has any of the lobing. Sorry, you probably can barely see. It's still got that like triangular leaf shape, but in comparison to these newer leaves, like this one right here, much more pronounced with those lobes or wings or whatever you want to call them. So it's a butterfly and it's spreading its wings, sprouting its wings. I don't know the phrase I'm looking for, but I think you guys get the gist. So my number 3 pick, I feel like it's gonna look a little wonky today. I normally have this thing on a trellis, but I put it on a little bamboo stick today. Oops, sorry. So this is a Philodendron tripartitum, and this thing gets me so excited. This has definitely been one of my favorite philodendrons for a couple years now, and its foliage in terms of its like plain appearance, it's just plain green, nothing wild about the foliage color or any like variegation or anything like that, but just this plain leaf shape is just to die for, in my opinion. Just the 3 parts, 2 wings coming off of it. It's called tripartitum, for God's sakes. Like, all of it's in the name. It's in 3 parts. So I just really appreciate the kind of difference that this one has in comparison to many of the other ones. It might not have the showiest foliage, but I think it's got dynamic enough foliage to definitely take my number 3 spot, no questions asked. So like I said, this is normally growing up a trellis, so I just have it kind of wonkily attached to this thing here, but you can kind of see down. Oops, I'm like terrified this thing is going to snap under its own weight. So this is some new growth coming on down here, but you can see it doesn't have the wings. So the juvenile growth on this houseplant does not have the wings. It will start to get it as it becomes a little bit more mature, but just to give you an idea of what this houseplant starts as or how you might end up purchasing this houseplant, I did order one recently that didn't have the wings, but in due time it will grow its wings, it will sprout its wings. Don't you be worried about that. But such an interesting one, super easy to propagate as well, just like many of these other stem philodendrons, but this one also falls into that category of a little bit more acceptable in the price tag as far as out there philodendrons go. Once again, I think for a nice, decent houseplant of this, I don't think you would or should be paying more than $50 to $100. I'm sure there are heftier price tags for all of the houseplants I'm going to be talking about today out there, but if you do some digging or just kind of wait for the right time, I'm sure that you are going to find one that more fits into your price range, but still beware. I think I purchased one recently for like $20, so pretty good deal. So yeah, but this philodendron's got so much character. I'm looking forward to this one also growing a little bit more, definitely a little bit more slower in the sense that I've had this thing for probably 2.5 years at this point, and granted it's grown a lot of stem, but it hasn't really held onto the leaves, so it's a little less maintainable than some of the other philodendrons that I'm talking about today, but I still can't help it. The leaves are so wonderful, whether it holds onto its leaves the entirety of the time or not, I'm still gonna be head over heels for it for probably years to come. but maybe it'll give me some better luck in the future as well. I wouldn't mind that. So my number 2 pick today is this ever so lovely Philodendron atabapoense. I feel like I don't really talk about this one on YouTube very often, but this is hands down my number 2 pick. As you can see, it has a very similar leaf shape to the bernardropazii, with the little wings that it has, although these are a little bit more put together in stature. As you can see, it's kind of just like goes straight up, has the wings, works its way back down with the sinus down to the petiole, and just it's very straight and uniform, very similar to like a Philodendron bilietiae, but I think this one has a little bit more character in the sense that, bam, it's got the purple on the back sides of the leaves. That's the absolute sucker punch with me in this houseplant and why I'm so obsessed with it. There are absolutely some other Philodendrons that sport different colors on the back sides of their leaves, but I just love how incredibly dynamic this one is with the more like darker green, bluish, almost grayish color that the leaves sport on the front, combined with the purple color on the back and the way that the stem kind of really shows through, or the vein, I don't know what this is called, but the main vein part of the plant just shows through. It's quite lovely. This has also been a little bit more of a slower grower. This is also a cutting that I've taken off of another plant that I have in my home. But this is one I feel like in a couple years it might be on my trellis, growing up to my ceiling, looking wonderful, and maybe as the leaves start to turn or they're developing, you'll get to see the purple and it'll just be one of those standouts on the trellis. So absolutely love this houseplant. It is one that deserves the extra popularity that I think it receives, although I still think this is probably more on par to the price to like the gloriosum, where I feel like you'd probably find this for between like 75 to 125. I'm just ballparking guesses, but if you do some digging, you might be able to find a nice starter plant for like $50 or less. Like I said, spend what you will. I have my price ceiling. I know some airway collectors are willing to spend crazy amounts of money. I do not recommend that personally for your bank account and your well-being and sanity, but if plants make you happy, you can do whatever you would like. Just hopefully they don't make you that happy. But I really do enjoy this houseplant. This is one that totally deserves the popularity, as I was saying. So completely understand it. And this one seems like a much more reliable houseplant. It holds onto its leaves much better, as well as my mother plant. Although I have found this one has put off some wimpier leaves in lower light. So this really does seem to be one of those philodendrons that requires that medium, bright, and direct light setting. So something to be wary of if you are bringing it in your home. But I think that could be said about like 75% of philodendrons. So that's not really a shocker there. So really fun plant. Totally has the character to deserve its spot in my number 2 spot, no doubt about it. And before I talk about my number 1 pick for my top 5 philodendrons, I do want to touch quickly on a couple of honorable mentions. So of course, my philodendron red emerald is one of my favorite houseplants. It's grown up to my ceiling and basically back at this point. And it's very inexpensive, one of the most inexpensive philodendrons out there if you're stepping out of the realm of like just your standard Hartley philodendron and the ones that you would likely find at your big box stores or your more common plant nurseries. Also, Philodendron mayoi with its lovely hand-shaped foliage is absolutely fabulous, and it's an excellent trailing houseplant with a lot of character. I've also had a really big soft spot for my Philodendron Jerry Horn recently. Thank you everybody who helped me identify it in my houseplant tour video. The leaves have grown to be like 20 inches long as it's continuing to grow up my trellis, and it's nearly reached the ceiling. I have no idea what I'm going to do with it. Wish me luck. And I will throw in one more honorable mention because why not? So I recently got in one of my houseplant unboxing videos last year a Philodendron bipennifolium aria, so it's like the lemon lime version of Philodendron bipennifolium, and that thing is still young. It's just starting to get going. But honey, let me tell you, I think all the other philodendrons should watch out because that thing might be at the top of my list by this time next year if it continues to grow well. So my number 1 pick for top 5 philodendrons is definitely no shocker for any of you if you watch me here on YouTube. I'm so sorry. Hear about me talk about it a lot, but it's my Philodendron squamiferum, and as always, I am kind of lumping in all of the houseplants that share this very, very similar leaf shape. So for example, Philodendron pedatum, Philodendron florida, is another one. They're all such incredible philodendrons, and I love them all. However, the killer when it comes to Philodendron squamiferum is these fuzzy red petioles that are just to die for and really stand out and set this one apart from the rest, in my opinion. So I've been a sucker for philodendrons with this leaf shape for years. I feel like any of my favorite houseplant videos or top 10 houseplant videos I've done, one of these has landed its way in the top like every time, if not the #1 spot, like the #2 spot. So yeah, it says a lot about this houseplant. I've been really obsessed with it for a while. It just has so much character. How can you not notice and fall in love with this leaf shape? It's just to die for. Even the underdeveloped ones, like this one that only has like a little bit of lobes, still looks fantastic in comparison to this one that's got a little bit more character and development to it. And the red petioles, like I said, are so interestingly crafted in their hairiness that's not necessarily like a fuzz that you're going to see in most other houseplants, but almost like it's expelling its plant matter the way that like a Play-Doh comes out as hair in those children's toys, if you remember playing with that as a child or if you have children. Of course, the red on the petioles does not hold up incredibly long. It still holds a little bit of a red tinge to it, but it's just the most vibrant when it's first developing. But it still holds on to that fuzz, and that is definitely one of the most gimmicky things about this houseplant. I know a lot of people say that they're freaked out by it, but I just think it's so incredible. Fortunately, this philodendron, I've been hearing or reading in the comments from you guys, has been available at big box stores, which is very incredible because this was once a houseplant that would probably garner, you know, a similar price tag to all the other ones I was talking about today. But now you can probably find it, if you're lucky enough, for like $25 or less at your big box stores. So that's really incredible because this is such an amazing houseplant. I think everyone deserves to grow this one in their home. And I can happily report that this is definitely a very easy philodendron to maintain, which is wonderful because if you think about some other houseplants, like the Philodendron Florida, for example, is a hybrid out of this houseplant that's, you know, hybridized to be more reliable as a houseplant to grow, where species can be sometimes a little bit more hit or miss in terms of how easy they are to grow. But this Philodendron squamiferum has been very maintainable, very easy to grow, easy to propagate. I have another one that I have growing on my trellis, which is the mother plant to this one, that has been growing very well as well. The only thing about these philodendrons that I should say with the lobes, I do find them to be quite susceptible to thrips in particular as far as pests go. You can see a leaf right here that sustained some thrips damage in the past. But as long as you are diligent to take care of them, you know, you can use some soap sprays or alcohol sprays, or I use houseplant systemics also, or even beneficial insects. There are so many ways to combat houseplant pests. It's something that you really shouldn't worry about. It's just something to be wary of because, you know, once these leaves get damaged, they don't look nearly as good with that damage that's never going to go away. But as long as you take care of it, this houseplant is a pretty vigorous grower when it comes to putting off leaves, so you'll continue to get some new, wonderful looking foliage for many years to come. So I think that's it for today's video. My top 5 choices for philodendrons. Let me know which houseplant you want me to talk about next. I am more than open to taking suggestions. And just to recap real quick, my top 5 philodendrons were Philodendron gloriosum in the #5 spot. #4 was Philodendron bernardopazii. #3 was Philodendron tripartitum. #2, Philodendron atabapoense. And #1, no shocker at all, was Philodendron squamiferum. All of these names sound more like gibberish the more I say them. But anyways, thank you guys so much for joining me. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at phillyfoliage, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great day.